The call from my son came at 7:14 in the morning, 3 days after I buried my wife of 38 years. Not to ask how I was doing, not to check if I'd eaten. He called to ask about the house. I remember standing in the kitchen, still in the same flannel shirt I'd worn to the cemetery, holding a mug of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. The frost on the back window hadn't melted yet. It was early March, still dark by 4 in the afternoon, the kind of cold that settles into old houses and doesn't leave until June. And my son's voice on the phone was asking me what my plans were for the house, whether I'd thought about downsizing, whether I'd spoken to anyone about the estate. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I just looked at the frost on the window. That was the beginning of the end, I think. Or maybe the end had started much earlier, and I was only just able to see it. My wife's name was Evelyn. We met when we were both 23, at a church social in Sudbury, Ontario. She was wearing a yellow dress and laughing at something her friend had said, and I thought, that's the woman I'm going to spend my life with. 40 years later, I still believed I'd been right. We built everything together. The house in Burlington, a 4-bedroom brick semi we'd bought in 1991 for what seemed like a fortune at the time. The landscaping business I'd run for 27 years before handing it off and retiring at 62. 2 children, our son, Nathan, and our daughter, Colleen. Evelyn was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in the spring of the year she turned 64. Stage 3. We did everything right. The surgery, the chemotherapy, the follow-up treatments at the Juravinsky. She fought hard. She was the toughest person I've ever known. But by the following February, she was gone. She died on a Tuesday. I held her hand until the end. Nathan arrived that evening with his girlfriend, a woman named Petra, who he'd been seeing for about 14 months. I hadn't warmed to Petra, and I want to be honest about that because I think it matters. It's not that she was unkind exactly. She was just always calculating. You could see it in her eyes when she looked around a room, not taking in the room, but appraising it, like she was estimating what things were worth. Colleen drove up from Hamilton the next morning. She came alone, sat with me at the kitchen table and cried with me. That's all she did for the first hour. She didn't ask about anything. She just sat there. The difference between my 2 children never felt so clear as it did in those first few days. I want to explain something about Evelyn's funeral, because I know people have questions when things don't happen the way they expect. In our family, in our faith, we don't rush these things. We had people flying in from 3 provinces. Evelyn's sister from Victoria, her brother from Halifax, cousins from Edmonton. Evelyn had asked specifically to be buried from the church where we'd been married, and arranging that took time. The priest she'd wanted to officiate had a commitment he couldn't break until the following week. We also had to wait for a headstone consultation, something Evelyn had been very particular about in her final months. The funeral was set for 17 days after she passed. I know that sounds long to some people, but every day of those 17 days I was doing something for her. Making phone calls, writing her obituary, going through photographs. It wasn't waiting, it was a different kind of grieving. Nathan knew all of this. I explained it to him the night Evelyn died, sitting in the living room with the lamp on low. He nodded. He said he understood. What I didn't know then was that he and Petra were already on the phone with their parents in Vancouver, working out logistics for a different event entirely. Nathan and Petra had been engaged for 6 weeks. I didn't know that either. He told me about the engagement 4 days after Evelyn's death. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where his mother used to make Sunday breakfast, and he said, "Dad, I have something to tell you. Petra and I got engaged back in January. We've been keeping it quiet because of everything with Mom, but we've set a date. We want to get married in June." I looked at him. I said, "June?" He said, "Yes." The venue was already booked. It was a place out near Niagara-on-the-Lake, a vineyard apparently. They'd put down a non-refundable deposit of $22,000. Petra's parents had wired the money from Vancouver. Invitations had already been sent to 60 guests. The wedding date was June 14th. Evelyn's funeral was June 12th. I don't know how long I sat there without speaking. Long enough that Nathan shifted in his chair and said, "Dad." I finally asked him, did he know the funeral was June 12th when he booked June 14th? He said the funeral wasn't set when we booked the venue. We booked it in January. That was technically true, and it would have been a reasonable point if he had come to me afterward, when the funeral date was set, and said, "Dad, we have a problem, what can we do?" But he didn't do that. He sat on it. For weeks. And then he told me 4 days after I buried my mother, like he was informing me of a scheduling conflict at work. I said I needed some time to think. He said, "Of course. Take all the time you need." Then he stood up and Petra appeared from the hallway. She'd been in the house the whole time, I realized, and they both went upstairs. That night, from the guest room, I could hear them talking. Not the words, just the rhythm of it. The sound of 2 people making plans. I called Colleen that evening. I told her everything. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Dad, what do you need from me?" I said I didn't know yet. I said I was still trying to understand what had just happened. She said, "I'll be there Friday." She was. In the weeks that followed, I began to notice things I'd either missed before or chosen not to see. Petra had started referring to the upstairs bedroom, the one she and Nathan were using, as our room. Not the guest room, our room. She rearranged the furniture in there without asking. She put her skincare products on the bathroom counter in a way that pushed Evelyn's things to the side. Evelyn's reading glasses were still on the nightstand in the master bedroom. I couldn't even bring myself to walk in there yet. And Petra was in the next room reorganizing shelves. Nathan started talking about the house more. Casually, the way you talk about something when you've already decided it's yours. This place would be beautiful with updated kitchen cabinets. The driveway is really overdue for repaving, Dad. You should look into that. Have you ever thought about converting the basement? Could be a nice income suite. An income suite. In my house. That I built with his mother. I said, "No, I haven't thought about that." He said something to consider. I smiled and went to wash the dishes. That night I called my old friend Vic. We'd known each other since our 40s, used to coach hockey together in the winters, and I told him what was going on. Vic listened. He didn't offer opinions right away. That's what I've always liked about him. After a while, he said, "Have you talked to Ken lately?" Ken is my solicitor. I'd used him for the business, wills, the usual things. I said, "Not recently." Vic said, "Might be worth a call." I called Ken the next morning. We talked for a long time. I told him about the house, about Nathan and Petra, about the June 14th wedding and the June 12th funeral. I told him about Evelyn's estate, how we'd drawn up wills years ago, how everything was set to pass, to Nathan and Colleen equally, the house included. Ken listened. Then he asked me some questions. He asked if I had any concerns about how the estate might be managed. I said yes. I was beginning to have quite a few. He said there were things we could look at. He mentioned a revocable living trust, which I'd heard of vaguely but didn't understand well. He explained it. Essentially, a legal structure that would allow me to maintain full control of my assets while I was alive, and to dictate very specifically how they were distributed after I died, in ways that a standard will doesn't always allow. He said it was flexible. It could be changed any time I wanted, as long as I was of sound mind. He also mentioned that if I had concerns about a particular beneficiary, there were ways to build in conditions. I asked him what kind of conditions. He explained. I sat with that for a few days. I thought about Evelyn. I thought about what she would have wanted. She would have wanted me to be fair. She always wanted us to be fair. But she also would have wanted me to be clear-eyed. And what I was seeing clearly was a son who had learned to love what I had built more than the people who built it. I went back to Ken the following week. We spent about 3 hours together. I left his office with a revised estate plan. I don't want to go into every detail, but the broad shape of it was this. The house would not automatically transfer to anyone. It would remain in trust. Colleen would be named the primary beneficiary under a structure that protected the asset long-term. Nathan would not be removed entirely, but his share was restructured significantly, and it came with conditions tied to behavior and circumstances I specified clearly in the language of the document. It was legally sound, it was thorough, and it was irrevocable in its core provisions. I told no one. June 12th was a warm day, unusual for Burlington that early in the summer, the kind of day where you could almost believe winter had never happened. The church was full. Evelyn's sister read a poem. Her brother spoke about what she was like as a girl. Colleen spoke too, and I don't know how she kept her voice steady, but she did. Nathan was not there. Petra was not there. Of the rest of my family, my brother, a couple of cousins, they'd made their choices as well. Some had bought flights to Vancouver for the wedding. Some just sent their regrets. I received a text from my cousin Terry that said, "Thinking of you today, Harold. So sorry we can't be there." Harold is my brother. My name is not Harold. I'm not sure he even knew which one of us had just lost a wife. Vic sat in the second row. He drove up from Hamilton in the morning and didn't leave until I was back home that evening. He didn't say much. He sat with me, and that was enough. After the burial, when the last car had pulled away and I was standing alone beside the grave for a few minutes, I thought about the conversation Nathan and I had had in the kitchen. I thought about Petra in the hallway. And I thought about the phone I had in my pocket, and the 43 missed calls that were already on it. I didn't open them yet. I stood there with Evelyn for a while longer. The calls had started around noon. I found out later that Nathan had tried to reach me from the vineyard between the ceremony and the reception. There were messages from cousins, from my brother, from Petra's mother in Vancouver. The tone of them varied. Some were confused. Some were apologetic, in that particular way that's more about the person apologizing than the person they're apologizing to. A few were angry. My brother's message said, "I don't know what you've done, but you need to call Nathan. He's upset. Call me when you get this." I didn't call Nathan that evening. I sat on the back porch with Vic and drank tea and watched the neighbor's dog wander through the yard. Colleen called around 8. She'd been waiting for me to reach out, she said. She didn't want to intrude. I told her she could never intrude. She asked how I was. I said I thought I was okay. I said I was tired in a way that didn't have much to do with the day. She understood. Nathan came to the house 3 days later. He came alone. Petra stayed in the car, which I thought was interesting. He walked in through the back door, which he'd always done growing up, and he found me at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a crossword puzzle. He sat down across from me. He looked like he hadn't slept well. He said he was sorry he hadn't been at the funeral. He said it in the way that people sometimes apologize when they want to put something behind them rather than actually address it. I said I understood there were complications. He nodded. He looked relieved. Then he said, "Dad, I want to talk about the house." I put down my pen. He said that he and Petra had been thinking, now that I was on my own, now that the house was probably too big for one person, whether I'd considered some arrangement. He used the word arrangement full times. He talked about how they were renting in Oakville and the market was brutal. He said it would make sense financially. He said that he was Evelyn's son too, and this house was part of their family history. I let him finish. Then I said, "Nathan, have you spoken to Ken lately?" He blinked. "Your solicitor?" "No, why?" I said. "After your mother passed, I updated some things. I thought you should know that. Nothing to worry about right now. Everything is in order. But you should probably speak with Ken at some point, whenever you're ready." He stared at me for a moment. Something shifted in his expression. Not anger yet. Closer to calculation. He said, "What does that mean exactly?" I said. "It means your mother wanted things to be handled carefully, and I've tried to honor that." He asked again what it meant, more directly this time. I looked at him, at the face I'd watched grow from an infant's face to a man's face over 60-some-odd years of my life, and I said, "It means I love you, and it means I've made my decisions." He left 20 minutes later without finishing his coffee. Petra called me the following week. She was calm on the phone in a way that felt rehearsed. She said she wanted me to know that they both respected whatever choices I'd made. She said they just wanted clarity. She said, and this is the part I still think about, "We just want to know what to expect, Leonard." Leonard is my name. She'd called me Mr. Ashworth for 14 months, every single time. And now on the phone talking about what to expect from my estate, it was Leonard. I said, "I think Ken can answer your questions better than I can. He's very good at explaining these things clearly." She thanked me. She said she'd be in touch. I didn't hear from her again for 3 months. What I heard eventually came through Colleen. Nathan had retained his own lawyer. That lawyer had reviewed the trust structure and come back with a long explanation about why challenging it would be expensive and almost certainly unsuccessful. Ken had done thorough work. Everything was clean. I also learned through Colleen that things between Nathan and Petra had become complicated. Petra's parents had expected. I don't know exactly what they'd expected, but whatever picture Nathan had painted for them of what their daughter was marrying into, it had included a certain understanding about property and inheritance that was no longer accurate. Colleen heard from a mutual friend that Petra had, at some point, used the phrase misrepresentation in a conversation about Nathan. I don't take pleasure in that. I want to be honest about that too. I don't enjoy knowing that my son's marriage began with that kind of tension underneath it. But I also didn't create that tension. I didn't make Nathan tell Petra a story about what he was heir to. That was his choice. Colleen came and stayed with me for 2 weeks in July. We repainted the back bedroom, the one that had been a nursery once, then a home office, then a catch-all storage room. We painted it a soft sage green that Evelyn had picked out years ago and never gotten around to using. We found the paint swatch still tucked in a kitchen drawer, labeled in her handwriting, "Back room, someday." We did it on a Saturday. We had the windows open and CBC Radio 2 on the portable speaker, and Colleen got paint on her elbow somehow despite wearing old clothes specifically to avoid that, and we laughed about it. In the evening we sat on the porch and I told her what I'd done with Ken, everything. She'd known pieces of it, but not the whole picture. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Did Mom know?" I said I told her, in the last few weeks when we were still able to have those conversations. She said, "Do what you think is right." Colleen looked out at the yard for a moment. Then she said, "That sounds like her." It did. That's exactly what Evelyn would have said. Not because she didn't care, because she trusted me. After 38 years, she trusted me to make the right call when she couldn't be there to make it herself. I don't know if I made the right call. I think about it. I'm 67 years old. I've got more mornings behind me than ahead of me, and I think about it. But I look at that sage green room. I think about Colleen driving up from Hamilton. I think about Vic sitting in the second row without being asked. And I think about standing at that graveside with 43 missed calls in my pocket and choosing to stay a few minutes longer. That was the right call. I'm sure of that one. Everything else I'm still working out.